If I could go back to one time, I think I would go to Nazareth, maybe around when Jesus is in his 20s, and just get to visit the household for one day. I want to hear conversations, or a Sabbath would even be better because they'd be talking all day, going to synagogue. I want to hear everybody. I want to hear James. What was he like? I want to hear their personalities. And I want to hear her. And how much did she speak? And how does Joseph behave with her? That's my time machine moment. I want to, and if I could do that, I think I would get a good handle on whether I'm even close to right. And I think I am.
That's fast. That helps me understand you and your motivations and interests better. I'm glad that you shared that. In many ways, this book is the closest thing that you can attempt to do to that time machine. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Transfigured. I'm here with Dr. James Tabor. He probably needs no introduction. I'm sure much of my audience is familiar with his work already, but in case you do need an introduction, he is a retired professor of religious studies from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and is currently a distinguished fellow in the humanities at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He has a PhD from the University of Chicago, and he has more books and articles than I can count. He also has a blog and a YouTube channel and all those sorts of things that I will link to in the description of this video to make it easy to find. But today we are going to be talking about one of his most recent books, The Lost Mary, Rediscovering the Mother of Jesus, and that will be the main focus of our conversation today. So Dr. James Tabor, welcome to Transfigured.
It's good to see you again, Sam. How long has it been?
I think it was like 3 years ago.
Yeah, I had to write this book, so I didn't have time to talk to you. Yeah.
Right, but
we've been talking about over the years. I remember last fall you wrote me, and I was doing, the book had just come out, and I didn't have time to come on, but you had said something about talk some more about Christology and so forth. So we've got a lot of things in the future, but for today, we'll talk about this book.
Yeah, we were even talking about the Transfiguration before the mic came on. But so yes, we've got plenty to talk about. But today, let's talk about Mary. So first off, why did you decide to write this book and focus on Mary of all the topics that you could spend your time and attention on?
Okay, well, put the book cover up first, and that will help me to let people really focus in on that. I love this cover. It's by a 1400, 15th century Renaissance painter from Italy. His name is Antonello. I didn't know him, but as soon as I saw this, I said, that's the cover. It's got that Mona Lisa enigmatic quality to it. And notice the Lost Mary implies what the book is about. Have we lost her? And the book actually starts with the sentence that will directly address your question. Mary is the best known, least known woman in human history, which I consider to be an extravagant and gripping statement. Think about it. There's nobody better known than Jesus's mother, Mary. More women on the planet are probably named Mary than any other name. It continues, if you go worldwide, for sure. And she's literally the Queen of Heaven, the mother of God to billions of people. You couldn't get greater than that. And yet I'm saying she's the least known. We know so little about her. So to even attempt this book and say, well, she's lost, but could we rediscover the mother of Jesus? And then you see there's a reading note, a new historical investigation of the most powerful woman in the world. So I add the idea of power and influence. Billions pray to her, as well as to Jesus or to God the Father in various forms of Christianity, particularly Orthodox and Roman Catholic. And there's a dispute even in the church now among Catholics, not by the theologians, and the Pope is very clear on this, that only Jesus is the mediator. But like any saint in Roman Catholic and Eastern tradition, you can go to these saints, and particularly Mary is seen as the ultimate, as she is, in fact, the tender mother of Jesus, who can go to her son, who can go to the Father, and so forth. Now, Protestants or non-Catholics don't say that about her, but looking at the New Testament, you have a very similar challenge. I think she's largely lost. Now, I have argued in the book that she's faded away purposely to some degree to de-emphasize the earthly side of Jesus and emphasize or overemphasize perhaps the heavenly side. It's almost like the Apostles' Creed, which I can quote a phrase or two from on Jesus. So Jesus is born of the Virgin Mary, crucified, died, and buried, raised the third day, coming again. And as I made the same point about Jesus in my main book about Jesus called The Jesus Dynasty 20 years ago. What's missing there? Born, Jesus, crucified. I think it would be called his life. Now with Jesus, we have these 4 accounts in the Gospels and other Gospels outside the New Testament, as you know, but primarily Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which we call the synoptics, and then John as a supplement to that, adding a lot of other things. And scholars try to sort through all that material. But when it comes to Mary, there's surprisingly little there. The birth of Jesus, just like with the Apostles' Creed, born of a virgin, is given in Matthew and Luke, but Mark doesn't even mention it, nor does John. John takes a theological approach. The Word, the Logos, was made flesh. So you could say, well, that's the birth, isn't it? Well, it's not really the birth, and it's not a birth narrative. It's a theological statement about Jesus existing in the beginning with God as this Logos. So that's very different than what I'm doing in this book. I do deal with theology at the end because I talk about how and why Mary became lost, and that is strictly a theological enterprise. So, Sam, we all know about the quest for the historical Jesus. Scholars talk about it all the time. So what I'm trying to do here is to launch a quest for the historical Mary. You look at that picture, you don't have to put it up again. It was up for a while. And you wonder what she's thinking. That's why I love the cover. It does have that Mona Lisa quality, we call it, where it's enigmatic. What is she? It looks deep for sure. And it looks so thoughtful. But in that mind and in that heart and in that head of hers, what's going on? She looks like a woman maybe in her 20s or 30s, and it's capturing her. Maybe she's looking back on the death of her son in that picture. Maybe she's looking forward as to what might be ahead and anticipating it. Who knows what's in her mind? And that's what I wanted the cover to convey. I couldn't have found a better image. So, the Lost Mary. Now, you asked me, why did I turn to this? A lot of my work on Christian origins has been built around figures, key figures. So we could start with Jesus, obviously. But when I deal with Jesus, I always start with John the Baptizer, or John the Baptist as he's better known, because he really inaugurates the movement. But if you go to the Gospel of Mark, our earliest, in my opinion, and Matthew and Luke both use Mark as a key narrative source, he doesn't have the birth. He just has John showing up. So I'd want to augment Mark and John with Mary, who's before. So in terms of figures, I would go like this: Mary, mother of Jesus, John the Baptizer. I don't know if you've ever noticed in Luke's account of John's birth, chapters 1 and 2, chapter 2 is more Jesus, chapter 1 is John. If you do the chronology on the two pregnancies, the pregnancy of Elizabeth, John's mother, and that of Mary, the mother of Jesus, who's 3 months pregnant, and Elizabeth is 6, and she stays 3 months with her. Think about this. Here's a visual I've never seen in a film. I wish they would cover this. Mary is there with Elizabeth attending at the birth of John. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying she's the midwife. I'm sure they had professionals to do that. So if you think about it, picture Mary, the young pregnant Mary, who fled the gossip of the village of Nazareth. And Luke says she made haste to the hill country of Judea. That's way down south, just west of Jerusalem. John is traditionally from a place called Ein Karim, and it's identifiable. And there are lots of things about John the Baptist that are remembered from that village, including a spring called Mary's Spring, of all things. Mm-hmm. So she spends the time there until John's birth and then goes back. But Mark doesn't have any of that. So you've got to kind of start with Mary. And by the way, Mark mentions Mary once in terms of name, where he names her and says, this is not Mary, the mother of Jesus, and his brothers, James, Joseph, Jude, and Simon, in chapter 6. But that's already chapter 6, and he hasn't mentioned the mother. And then the brothers and sisters show up at various times, and then at the cross. Mm-hmm. So it's very similar in a way to the Apostles' Creed with Jesus. Mary at the birth, John the Baptist and Jesus, obviously Jesus' birth. And then the big scene is at the cross. And then you got 2 or 3 other scenes. I totaled them up in my book. They're in a footnote where I list them all. There are about 12 scenes of Mary, and that's not counting duplicate scenes where Mark has one and then Matthew and Luke might have a version of that. And you can even get it down to about 10. I like the number 10. Mm-hmm. And I have a slide where I show all 10. But to write a book from those 10 verses would be very difficult. So that was my challenge. But let me go back to why I did it in terms of her. So you have her as the first character of the movement. She's there before anyone else, and she's attending at the birth of John. And then John comes on the scene about 30 years later. So now we skip 30 years. And we know very little, but we're going to fill this in through what I do in the book. I fill in those missing years. And then we have different scenes. John, for example, doesn't even give her name. He always says his mother. Yeah. But never imagine if all we had was John, and many Christians, they just love the Gospel of John. And you almost want to say, wow, you love John. What's Jesus' mother in John? And they would say, well, Mary, of course. And you go, did you know that that's not in John? So I call that fading away. Just the mother, not even giving her name. Of all the women you would name,
do you think sometimes that the theory that John is sort of assuming a knowledge of the synoptic gospels as he's writing, and it's something more of a supplement or an expanded or in-depth thing where he expects his readers to know that?
But I don't think that excuses not giving her name, just to say his mother. It's just obviously readers down through the ages need to know her name, but they do, because she became the most famous woman in the world. And then you go on from that and you get James, the brother of Jesus, who took over leadership of the movement. I'm sure many of your viewers and followers know that because you cover that kind of thing, but many, many Christians have no idea who James is. And the way to really illustrate it is Luke. When Luke, the author of Luke, if he's Luke or not, we won't go into that right now, but the author of Luke Acts, 2-volume work, when you come to the listing of the brothers, he doesn't give the names. He just leaves them out. Whereas Mark lists them, and he's following Mark. He just, forget those brothers. And then he comes to the book of Acts, and he does say in chapter 1, his mother Mary and his brothers were there. Now, this is the day of Pentecost, the founding of the church, so to speak, from a Christian viewpoint. But Peter is the dominant character all the way through until you get to Acts 15. And when you get to Acts 15, the most important meeting the early movement ever had collectively, Peter's come in for that meeting. If he's been traveling, Paul has come in. The big question is, what do we do with the non-Jews if they join the movement and are baptized into Christ? Are they fully members of the new covenant community, or should they also begin to move toward Judaism more and possibly even convert formally and become Jews like proselytes? And there are people in that meeting, it's a minority from what we can tell, who do think that would be the best course. Peter says no, Paul says no, and then somebody stands up and says like this, okay, we've heard everything, here's my decision. And he is called James, but he's not called James, the brother of the Lord or the brother of Jesus, he's just called James. So how would you know who he is? You know he's not the fisherman, because the fisherman, James, remember Peter, Andrew, James, and John, he's beheaded by Herod, not Herod the Great, or Herod, it's Herod Agrippa, in chapter 12. So he's not even on the scene. So by default, we think, James. And then later in chapter 21, he's still in charge, and he even tells Paul, we've got all these believers and they're zealous for the Torah, they're Jews, and we know you're a Jew and you're zealous for the Torah as a Jew. But some people are saying that maybe you're not, and we're not going to do a program on Paul here, but we've talked about this, I think, at various times. Paul just keeps quiet in that scene. I don't know it's an exact scene of what everybody said, depends on your view of these records, but it presents the scene, and Paul's like, okay, what do I need to do? But he doesn't go, oh no, I fully observe Torah. Yes, of course. He just says. So it's kind of funny to me, because James says, in order that everybody would know that this is not true about you, Paul, these rumors, we want you to go in the temple and do all of these rituals. And Paul goes, okay, I'll do that. So there we have our characters. And then I would add Mary Magdalene. She's at the cross as well, this mysterious figure that just shows up all of a sudden. And Luke knows a little about her background in Luke chapter 6, and she's a leading woman along with two others that are named Susanna and Joanna, who support the movement with funds. And it says they did it and many other women. So Luke does emphasize that. But in terms of who is Mary Magdalene and why is she so prominent with the mother, with her at the cross, the beloved disciple, and so forth. So I thought, I'm not going to write a book. Well, let me put it this way. And then Paul, of course, I mentioned Paul, but talking about figures. So you go Mary, John the Baptist, Jesus, James, Paul. And Peter's important, but in terms of just the central figures that are the leaders of the Jewish movement, the Jerusalem church, as it's sometimes called, I would put James over Peter, and Paul does as well.
Yeah, he calls them a pillar.
Pillars, yeah.
In Galatians.
Actually, he's sarcastic about it. He says the so-called pillars, what they are means nothing to me. But he's wound up at that point. That's in Galatians. I don't think he's doubting the recognition that they have in the community. But he's just saying, if they happen to disagree with me on this question of what Gentiles need to do in terms of the Torah and becoming Jews, then doesn't matter to me what they say because I hear directly from Jesus. But that's another question if we talk more about Paul. So by process of elimination, I began to think, well, I'm not going to write about John the Baptizer because James McGrath has done that, and he's done such a fabulous job.
I was going to say, your book reminded me of James McGrath's book on exactly. John the Baptizer. I'm like, okay, what can we say about John the Baptizer?
Exactly, it baptized and diminished, and
right, it could fit on a note card this big, but then he squeezes extra juice out of the lemon that you didn't think was there anymore, and paints a really full and compelling picture. And I felt like your book about Mary was doing similar juice squeezing from limited information to paint a really full picture.
Absolutely. And I like your image of juice squeezing. I've used breadcrumbs in the forest, and I've used puzzle pieces, missing puzzle pieces, all kinds of analogies. So the idea would be, okay, Mary, other than devotional books and some quasi-historical studies, like Ray Brown has a book called Mary in the New Testament, which goes through all the New Testament references. And he has this huge book, The Birth of the Messiah, that's on the birth narratives. So that's there. But as far as the quest for the historical Mary, and Mary Magdalene, really good scholars have treated her since our Dan Brown book and movie got so much attention, and then the public turned to Mary Magdalene. And James really has had a lot of attention, and Paul, are you kidding? So really, when you think of these major figures, these 5 or 6 major figures, however you want to count them, to me, Mary was the missing piece. And I spent the most time on this book over any book that I've tried to write. And so that's really my reason. I wanted to fill in what we could know with these pieces and see what we could come up with. And the way I had to do it, my method, was to use contextualization. That's what I would call it. I have to put her in her place, in her time. And when I say place, I mean literally, where was she born? Where did she grow up? What's our best evidence? And pointing out particularly the importance of Sepphoris, which many Christians have never heard of. If you look at an old Bible, family Bible that you might have around, if you're old enough, I have old family Bibles from my childhood. The maps in the back won't even have Sepphoris on it. But put up that Galilee map for a minute.
Yeah, Sepphoris. So for anyone listening and not watching, it's about halfway between the Sea of Galilee and Mount Carmel. Mm-hmm. Just really a pretty short walk, slightly north and west of Nazareth.
Now, look in an old Bible, and you will see Nazareth will be huge. Now, look below Sepphoris. It's actually 4 miles, and it's to the southeast, and you'll see Nazareth. And if you look closely, I have to lean in here to see it. You also see Jaffa just below Nazareth. Mm-hmm. Now, here's what I want to emphasize. Sepphoris is the urban capital of the Galilee. Nazareth is 4 miles south. So put up that map, Sam, no, not that one yet, Tuckahoe in the Bronx. It says Tuckahoe, New York. Put that one up there. Now, why would I put this up? I want you to get the point. This is reversed in terms of north and south, but I was looking for a little town north of New York City, and I'm going to imagine in the future, far future, hundreds of years, a United States president being from Tuckahoe, born in Tuckahoe, 4 miles north of New York City, the Bronx, with all the 5 boroughs just readily accessible. And someone writes a biography of this famous President X, let's call him. And they talk about Tuckahoe and what it's like growing up in New York. And they do the whole life. It's a big, thick biography. And I buy it. I'll go to the future here. And I open it up and I think, wow, I've studied a lot about my own period, the 2000s. And I wonder how New York is treated. Did this president did he go to New York? Does he mention New York? And I look in the index, New York City's not mentioned anywhere. Just an analogy, a crazy analogy. So we've all heard of Nazareth. It's huge. It's where Jesus was born. And we're not aware of Sepphoris. So Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, rebuilt Sepphoris as Jesus was growing up. Now, why does he need to rebuild it? Because in the year 4 BC, when his father Herod the Great died, it was utterly destroyed, down to the ground, burnt down to the ground. I've excavated there. And we have come down to levels where we can even find some of the burnt levels. And you might be interested in this in terms of archaeology. I've seen this in Jerusalem at other sites as well. If you find a piece of charred wood, you can kind of scratch it and smell it, and the smell is still there after 2,000 years.
Wow.
It's kind of amazing.
Wow. That is amazing.
Yeah. I've got pieces of pottery around here that are just burnt on the edge. Can't smell that as much, but you can see the burn marks from Jerusalem. So anyway, but back to the Galilee. Now, here's a true confession, Sam. When I finished my PhD at the University of Chicago, I'm trying to think back. It's been a while because I've been teaching for 4 decades before I retired. I don't think I had really dwelt on Sepphoris. I'm almost afraid to say that I don't think I would have even known what it was, or I might have said, oh, I remember that in Josephus. It's like a city in the Galilee, Josephus mentions. I would not have put it all together. And only later did I begin to understand this. I ended up excavating there in the 1990s. And you can go to my YouTube channel. And very recently, I put a slide presentation that I would call the archaeology of Mary, where you can see pictures of all these things that I'm talking about. We put up a few, but so put up that other slide, that final slide, Sepphoris and Iaphia. No, not that one. There. Now here's what's important. So there's Sepphoris, and you got Nazareth just below. Now what is this Jaffa or Iaphia? It's not Jaffa on the coast. People have heard of Jaffa, the famous port. This is Iaphia in the middle of the country. Now, according to Josephus, the Jewish historian who knew these places and knew this region, Sepphoris is the urban capital. Iaphia is the largest town. So Nazareth is a suburb of Iaphia, the largest town. And it's a walled town. It even has a theater. None of it is excavated. Very small portions have been tried, but Nazareth is now spread over that whole valley. And so it's a megapolis. It's the largest Arab city in the center of Israel, or the West Bank, as it's called by some. And then Sepphoris is the urban capital. So here's where Mary comes in. Not only do we think Mary was born in Sepphoris, and I give the evidence for that in those slides and in lectures that I've given. We don't need to go into all of that. But so her parents, we think their names are Joachim and Anna, live in Sepphoris. They own land there, and she's born there. She marries a builder or carpenter, as it's called in English, a tekton, who seems to be maybe from Nazareth, because they end up going to Nazareth, or maybe they just end up settling there. It depends. In Luke, she seems to already be there. But in Matthew, it seems like they go to a town called Nazareth. They just, find that town. So we don't know that. But here's what we do know. Jesus is born. I put it as 5 BC. You can dispute the dates various. Hold on. You can dispute the dates in various ways, but in 4 BC, when Herod the Great dies, the king of the Jews, revolts break out all over the country. 3 major revolts. The one in the north we're really interested in because it centers in Sepphoris. And Judas, son of Hezekiah, he's not to be confused with later in the year 6 AD or CE, Judas the Galilean. This is Judas, son of Hezekiah. Who's Hezekiah? Hezekiah is a brigand or a bandit that Herod the Great had defeated. Now his son has come up and thinks, well, now in this vulnerable position, before Herod Antipas really becomes king, I can take advantage and take over not only the Galilee, but maybe the whole country and set up an independent Jewish state in that Maccabean tradition that had gone on in the previous century under the Maccabees, 100 years of independence. So Sepphoris is rebuilt because the Romans come in with a legion of troops and destroy Sepphoris. They send 3 legions down. There's another revolt across the Jordan, and there's one down in Judea as well. They're all covered in the book. I call it the year of the 3 messiahs, each one wanting to be a messiah. And so in the time of Jesus, I'll give you 2 images. Ready? One is Mary hiding in Nazareth with her husband Joseph, nursing the newborn infant Jesus, who's a year old, and Sepphoris going up in flames. Now, you can see Sepphoris from anywhere in Nazareth if you walk up the hills. It's built on probably a half dozen different hills, but it's in one of the little valleys where there's a spring, and it's right on the north side. So as you walk up the hill, you see the gleaming city set on a hill, and at night it would just be all lit up. Again, in my slide presentation, people can go to later and see some of these visuals I'm describing, that what it looks like today and so forth in the excavations. So the other scene then is not Mary hiding, but things normalize. The city is now being rebuilt by the son of Herod the Great, Herod Antipas, who's the one who beheads John the Baptist and the one who tries to kill Jesus. But Jesus gets away from him and hides. So imagine a building project that's the greatest building project since his father Herod the Great had built Caesarea. So now he's going to rebuild Sepphoris. Later he does Tiberias on the coast of the Sea of Galilee, but that's later, and he names it after the Emperor Tiberius. So here's the other scene. I like to say the alarm clock rings at 4:30. Mary and the girls get up, the boys begin to stir. We've got 5 boys and 3 or more girls. There could be more sisters, but they're traditional names of 3, Mary, Sarah, and Anna. But there could be others, we just don't know. So let's just say a family of 7 or 8 kids maybe. And they're getting ready for the men to head into Sepphoris for a day's work. Tecton means builder, really. We have the word architect is the chief builder. And I would suggest that they're probably closer to stonemasons than carpenter. Carpenter, you can translate it that way in English, but that's not the Greek word. It could very well be a builder. And Jesus refers to stone cutting and laying foundations and making them deep and building with a good cornerstone and so forth.
Yeah.
It's a guess. But either way, the employment is just going to be 4 miles to the north. And when I was digging there with my students, we used to walk from Sepphoris to Nazareth and get lunch because we would get up at 4:30 in the morning for the dig. And then we would quit around 1 or 2 noon. I imagine in the time of Jesus, if they're working in Sepphoris, they're coming home at dark, 4:30, 5 o'clock, tired as heck. And it's been a tough day. And then you get up and do it again, and they get the Sabbath off. So those 2 scenes, I found them really chilling, Sam. One is just terrifying. There is an excavated first century house in Nazareth, and there's a cistern in the house. And every house had a cistern, probably, or many did, for water sources. You can dig down and get water from the water table. Cephas has a huge water table, and the people in Nazareth can draw from it. And I picture them hiding in the cisterns as Roman troops are going by. And then I have a chapter in the book, 2,000 crucifixions.
Yeah.
So what I'm doing is contextualizing Mary. None of that is in the New Testament. Cephas not even mentioned in the New Testament. The New Testament is trying to give a certain theological and doctrinal take on Jesus for believers after the fact. And Jesus as the Messiah, raised from the dead, returning in the clouds of heaven and so forth, glorified. And so their purpose is not to do the kind of thing that I'm doing. I'm trying to uncover that and rediscover the mother of Jesus. So there you use your imagination. A mother of 7 or more children, what's it like in the household? I try to recapture some of that. But also Mary growing up, if she's born in Cephas, and maybe she, by the time of Jesus, is, say, 14 or so. That's usually the guess of most people, 13, 14, 15. I believe one of my grandmothers was married at 14 or 15. So going back a couple generations in my family, I'm familiar with that. And she had, 10 children. One died. So I grew up with 9 uncles and aunts,
Wow.
So I sort of knew what that was like.
Sure.
Well, just to think of her that way. Now, what happens with her because of theology is she gets no children but Jesus. So she's married, but without sex. She never sleeps with her husband, contrary to Matthew chapter 1, which talks about the birth of Jesus and Joseph taking her as his wife. He was engaged to her. Those engagements can last for months, up to a year. But instead of divorcing her, he accepts the pregnancy based on a dream that he had, that the child is begotten of the Holy Spirit. That could be interpreted as no human father. It could be interpreted as take the child. Because Matthew is very interesting. You probably remember this. In his genealogy, which is the genealogy of Joseph, I think we all tend to agree on that. And the father before Joseph is Jacob. Notice, Jacob, Joseph, makes sense. That's his genealogy, and that's what it says. But 4 women are named. You never put women in a standard genealogy.
Standard genealogies are patrilineal by definition.
Yes. Yeah. So who were these 4 women? And you start checking, and every one had a questionable sexual story about them. Sure. Sometimes outright.
Yeah.
Okay. Tamar. What does she do? Mm-hmm. She dresses like a prostitute and sleeps with her father-in-law, Judah, and gets pregnant with twins. Ooh, not a nice story. Mm-hmm. Rahab the harlot, but Matthew records her as part of the ancestry. Bathsheba, not named, but called the wife of Uriah to make it really clear that that's adultery, which it is clearly in the text. And Ruth, who crawls under the blankets with Boaz and gets him. First, she gets him drunk, and she feeds him and gets him drunk, and then crawls under. And in the Hebrew expression, she uncovers his feet, is a euphemism for she slept with him. And Boaz marries her, and he then becomes the direct ancestor of Jesse, which leads to King David. So could Matthew be winking 4 times to the reader? I'm going to tell you a story about Mary. Wink, 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 wink. Don't judge too harshly. This is of God. Now, whether you go with virgin birth, as it's called, or conception with no male involved, or a very special birth that might have involved the human father, which some have argued. And I have a chapter on that called Mary's Secret, appropriately.
Sure.
It's different from what I say in the Jesus Dynasty because I wanted to clarify it more, but I don't want to get to that now. So anyway, we've got that story told, and the turmoil that's going on at that time is what we're talking about, and 2,000 crucifixions, and trying to put Mary into that whole mix of hiding and protecting her son and thinking, what is ahead for this messianic child? I mean, I'm of the line of David. Joseph, my husband's of the line of David. So I think Luke's genealogy in chapter 3 is Mary's genealogy. Now, a lot of conservative Christians, whether you want to call them evangelicals, fundamentalists, the church fathers have often said, because they want to reconcile the two genealogies. Okay, Matthew's Joseph, this has to be Mary. But many critical scholars would say, oh, no, you can't do that. You want to get rid of the conversation.
That's a cope or yeah.
Absolutely. Look, they're not the same. It says Joseph. It traces it down to Joseph. But if you look at it carefully, it seems to imply, as was supposed of Joseph. The word in Greek is always of. So as was supposed of Joseph, but then it names right before that Eli. Well, wait, we know Joseph's father was Jacob. So we're changing fathers and grandfathers. Now Jesus has a different grandfather. Yes, he does. Because Eli and Eliakim and Joachim are all the same name. Like we have a king of Israel, of ancient Israel. And Eliakim and Joachim are the same. One is Yahweh is my God. The other is El or Elohim is my God. So Joachim seems in this genealogy to be called Eli, and then you get Mary. So I think it's Mary's genealogy. But more than that, I have a whole chapter on this. More we can uncover just from the names, that these are priestly names as well as tracing it through David, King David, and Judah, the tribe of Judah, King David. So this child is Davidic. But wait a minute. If I go to Matthew, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, come down to David, Jesse, David, Solomon, right? He's the king of Judah and Israel, of all Israel. Everybody knows the name Solomon. You go to this other genealogy, how could it not be Mary's? Even though my colleagues go, oh, you're just trying to harmonize. No, I'm not trying to harmonize. I'm recognizing the differences that are absolutely irreconcilable. And I believe Luke's aware of Matthew. I'm one of the scholars that thinks he knows Matthew, and he wants to supplement. I would even say certain things that Matthew did with the sayings material that they share in common. He prefers his fuller versions and so forth. The thing that people sometimes call Q.
So if he's aware of Matthew and yet his genealogy is very different than Matthew, then he's clearly doing something else.
Absolutely. And guess what? This is what nobody's noticed. There's a chart in my book. I think I'll tell you the page. We could put it up, but we don't need to. It's page 103. So if people get the book, they can look this up. And look at this first name. I'll hold it up just so you can see the visual. King David, and then you have Nathan. Now there's a Nathan the prophet in the Davidic story with Bathsheba. This is not that Nathan. This is the descendant of David, not the prophet Nathan. What is that about? Well, it turns out Bathsheba had another son. She had 3 sons that we know of. The first one died. That was the one from the pregnancy, the adulterous union. Second one is Solomon. He becomes king. We have a third son. I mean, think of the kings of England, what we have going right now. with Diana's two sons, right? And so, there can be two sons, and one can be almost forgotten if he doesn't become king. And he was. He's only mentioned in a list in 2nd Chronicles. But I will add this, Sam, and if you had never noticed this, and I think I put it in a footnote so you could miss it. Nathan's mentioned one other time.
Where's that?
Zechariah. In Zechariah, when it talks about the pierced one and who will mourn.
Sure. Yeah.
It says the family of David and the families of Nathan. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
So Zechariah somehow is aware of this messianic lineage and is focusing on the mourning of the family of David, but through Nathan. And he also mentions the family of Levi will mourn. Well, why would they mourn? Of this Davidic one pierced. It is a Davidic figure that's pierced. Scholars would come up with all sorts of candidates, Josiah and different people have been named. But it's the most mysterious chapter. It's Zechariah 10, I believe, right? Zechariah 10.
Sounds right. About
the pierced one. They will look toward me regarding the one they've pierced and mourn for him as one mourns for an only son. And then it talks about the families of Levi and the families of Judah and so forth. So that lineage is known and talked about in the late Second Temple period. It's just not known to us because we go holy with Solomon. Now, why would I trust Luke to come up with this genealogy? Whoever wrote Luke Acts, and maybe it was Luke and maybe it was someone later, 99% of scholars would not accept that it's Luke, the physician, talking about your critical scholars, your mainstream scholars. And, that's not important for what we're talking about is who wrote it. But whoever wrote it does say in the preface that I've carefully researched different accounts that are being circulated, and I've now written to you what seems most accurate. Now, accurate is one way to translate it. You can also translate it in order. Well, I don't think he means in order, because if you start looking at Luke and compare it to Mark and compare it to Matthew, it would be really hard to make an argument that Luke is mainly interested in keeping a certain order, because things switch around in various ways. But that word can also mean accurately, meaning I've got some other research. So here I rely on Richard Balcom. I thank him in the preface. We've never met. I don't think I've even run into him at conferences. We've corresponded a lot over the years. And in his book, Jude, the brother of Jesus, where he talks about the family of Jesus, the despasunai, they're called, meaning family of the Lord, the kinsman of the Lord, literally. Despot is Lord. Sounds like a bad word today in English, but it means the master.
Yeah.
And Sunai is relatives, like Mary was a relative of Elizabeth. And he says that the families known for keeping genealogies very carefully to prove their pedigrees are really Davidic. And these Davidic families, their most important treasure is their pedigree.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you going to take, Sam, if your house is burning? God forbid.
Yeah.
These family photos, if you got, or a disc with the photos, maybe your personal Bible. You might grab my book, The Lost Mary, for sure, and McGrath's book, but you're not going to take a lot out, right?
Right. My full name is Samuel Adams because I'm related to the Adams political family in American history.
Right. Then you would take that big
right.
box.
And we've got a family tree.
Oh, you have to take
that was made by my great grandmother or something.
That's
like
perfect.
That.
What a perfect illustration.
Right. So yeah, it's exactly like that. Because we're Adamses, and we keep track of the fact that we're Adamses, and so that's.
So look, I'm known as a historical critical scholar. It doesn't mean that I have to have a knee-jerk reaction to every question and go along with what 95% of my colleagues say. I get along fine with them. Bart Ehrman regularly has me on his conferences and so forth. I get to come in the door, even though I hold what some people would say, well, those are more conservative views. And others are going to say, what, Tabor conservative? You crazy? He says all these things about the resurrection and empty tomb. He's very liberal. Well, forget those labels. Let's just talk about facts. Let's talk about issues. I see no reason to think that Luke, the writer of Luke, author of Luke, just made up an arbitrary list or just grabbed something somewhere. It just makes no sense. First of all, everybody's going to read it and go, Nathan, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
He can't be Davidic then. Who's Nathan? You'd have to go looking for that, right? And you're not going to find it very easily. If you started in Genesis and read through the Bible, you'd probably even miss it because it's only in Chronicles where it's mentioned. And in the Hebrew Bible, that would be at the very end, and you'd be tired and you'd probably quit by then. So who's this Nathan? And then you start noticing these other things. Priestly names like Levi. Look, Levi and other Levitical names, Matthat, Matthew, I think there's 6 Matthews. And Matthew's name is Levi. Josephus's name is Matthias, right? And he's a Hashmonean.
Interesting.
Matthias, Joseph Matthias. And so these priestly names are mixed with some of the royal names of the family of David. And I think there's been this intermarriage. So what I uncover is a whole new possibility for understanding Mary as doubly royal. And therefore, she is not only bringing to her sons the Davidic lineage, but also the priestly lineage. Now, some would say, well, a woman can't pass that on. Most priests marry other priests, and Davidic figures marry other Davidic figures, probably because you want to keep the line pure if they can. It's not absolutely necessary. But we do know that Judah, the first Judahite was Judah, and he marries, I believe her name was Elisheva, who's a Levite. So you're already mixing the lines in as far back as it started, the line of Judah, the tribe of Judah in the Hebrew Bible, in the book of Genesis and Exodus and so forth. So I think it's Mary's genealogy, and I think we learn a lot from it. And further, I argue the possibility that it's Hashmonean, because you even have names like Jannai. Jannai is unknown other than Alexander Jannaeus. And yet there's a Jannai there, and there are other Levitical names that you'll see. So I think Mary's doubly royal. That makes Jesus very special, and James and all the other brothers, in terms of this lineage. And women can pass on the lineage. It's not the regular later patriarchal lineage, but there are cases where it goes through women, and I cover all that in the book. In fact, there's one queen of Israel at one point. She doesn't rule for very long, but her son is very young, and they make her queen for a while. But in the Hashmonean period, we have more women of priestly descent ruling, such as what? Alexander Salome, or Salome Alexander, the best known, who's married, and when her priestly husband dies, she really takes over and rules for years. So women can seed. Did you know that?
Yeah.
In the Hebrew Bible.
Well, I did. I wouldn't have thought that until you pointed that out to me. But
yeah, it's actually the word sperm. What we say sperm or zara in Hebrew.
Yeah.
So at least
but it's right there in Genesis, as you point out.
That's right.
The seed of the woman. I mean, you don't have to read very far into the Bible.
Yeah, Genesis, seed of a woman. Yeah. And when a woman seeds seed, that means whenever a woman gets pregnant. That's how you say pregnant. She seeds seed. She puts forth a seed. So it's actually very biologically up to date. We lost this in the Middle Ages, but apparently ancient Near Eastern and ancient Hebrew people at least knew this, that the woman contributes as much or more than the man. I would say a lot more. They didn't microscopically know all the facts, but they knew that the woman was not an empty vessel, as they thought in the Middle Ages and in even
Aristotle
and certain Greeks, that it's just something to hold the baby, which has to come from the man. That's not true in Judaism. And so that changes everything. Women can be strong. And it reminds me of this saying of Jesus when he says that if the crowds didn't cry out, the stones would cry. And John the Baptist says, God can raise up from these stones children of Abraham. And so the idea that a chosen one has to come through a certain established cultural, societal thing that we've decided only men can do this, women can do this. Like today, to be Jewish, you have to have a Jewish mother. And it's a very practical move, and it makes perfect sense because a woman can identify who was the father of her child, most likely, and work out the times and so forth. So let's trust the woman, not the man who said, yeah, that's my child, because they didn't have DNA tests in that day to be able to establish those disputed kinds of paternity facts that we can do today. So all of that is to say that you want to contextualize the times, the places, everything you can know about the genealogies, and try to put her back. Now, let me add something else, and then I'll pause where you can kind of recover from this long overview of why I wrote Mary. Here's something else where I differ with many scholars on. So genealogies and all of that we've said. But what about the idea that if it's been 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, nobody would remember anything? Think about it.
No.
Again, thank you, Richard Bauckham. The wonderful book, The Eyewitnesses. Now, whether you agree with his whole thesis that all these people that are referred to are eyewitnesses, I don't think they are. I think there's editing, and I take a critical, analytical view of the Gospels and of the Gospel of John. But I'm not going to go overboard with it because of my own experience. I was not born in World War II. I'm the first of the baby boom, so I'll reveal my age. I was born in 1946, so I'm going to be 80 years old in just about less than a month in March. So congratulate me.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
So I made it to 80, and I think I'm of a sound mind.
It seems like it to me. It doesn't seem like you're slowing down at all from what
I'm probably speeding up, if anything, which is probably a good thing. But my father was in World War II. He joined the Army Air Corps the day after Pearl Harbor. World War II is as familiar to me as my own experience. So you think Mary doesn't remember Herod the Great? She's only 14. A 14-year-old that remembered the horrors of that man towards the end of his life, murdering sons and murdering different potential rivals to the throne. I cover all that in those two chapters, Game of Thrones and the other one.
No.
And I think you would agree, Sam. I'm going to force it out of you if you don't. That history is so dense, but I worked so hard to make it readable. Doesn't mean you'll remember all the names, but as you're reading it, you're turning the page, and it's like, whoa, wave after wave. Oh, this happened, this happened, this happened.
I really enjoyed that portion of the book. Like, you have sort of your intro chapter, Mary as sort of the most known and unknown woman in history. And then it's like, all right, now we're going deep into Josephus stuff and Hasmonean stuff and Herodian
stuff.
It's
so complex. And I've tried to read it over the years, and you just glaze over. But I glazed over writing it, but I just kept thinking, no, make it clear. Don't use three names for somebody. Don't do, this person, the first or the second or third, and get everybody confused. Just make it clear. So Mary grew up with those things. I did an interview with John Dominic Cross, and it's on my YouTube channel. It's 2 hours long, and I just loved interviewing with him. And he loves the book. but he's Irish, remember?
Mhm.
And he talks about James growing up in Ireland as a small boy in the early 20th century. We talked about the day of the rebellion, the Irish rebellion. I think it was 1798. He said that was as real to us as something that happened in our own lives. Now, I'm old enough to remember John F. Kennedy's assassination. And I dare say hundreds and hundreds of your viewers are going to say, yep, I know where I was. And you know what? I'm going to ask them right now. What day of the week was it? Friday.
Mm-hmm.
What? That's been over 60 years, and you remember the day of the week something happened?
Wasn't it Good Friday of all Fridays?
It was Friday, November 22nd.
Friday,
we'll never
November.
forget it at noon. So
Abraham Lincoln was killed on Good Friday. Sorry. Anyway, trying to defend my reputation of historical facts.
Was he was killed on Good Friday?
Isn't that something else that Abraham Lincoln was killed on Good Friday?
I've never heard that mentioned. But anyway, the point is we remember these things. I mean, who doesn't remember what day was your wedding on, Sam? What day of the week was your wedding?
It was a Saturday, of course.
And how many years have you been married?
I've been married 10 and a half years.
You remember that after 10 years?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I can tell you about
where it was. And
yes, absolutely. I can tell you about September 11th. So I wasn't alive for JFK, but I was 11 years old for September 11th.
Of course.
I was in 7th grade. Okay. I remember going to school. I remember the kids whispering to each other. I remember the superintendent coming on the microphone system to tell us all halfway through.
These things are vivid.
And parents coming to pick up their kids from school because I don't know why, but that seemed like the right thing to do. I remember going to recess the next day, looking up. I lived near O'Hare Airport in Illinois, and there were no planes in the sky during recess.
Yeah,
that was completely unusual. Yeah, right.
So my point here, don't miss. Let me make sure everybody gets the point. I'm not saying that everything you read in the Gospels is eyewitness because people can remember things for decades. That's not what I'm saying. I still read the Gospels like I've always read them, but I'm talking about Mary. Mary remembers things. And so if I contextualize her and put her into that world and give her Cephas back and give her children back and explore the idea of the possibility of Cephas being rebuilt and the boys working there, we can restore what's called the lost years of Jesus or the lost years of Mary. Then when we pick up the story in Mark, when Jesus we think is around 30, we can go from there. So that's what I try to do in the book. That's a summary of the methodology of using, and the other thing is archaeology, which goes with this, to be on the ground, to be excavating at Cephas and walking on mosaics from the first century. And my students say, Dr. Tabor, I feel like taking off my shoes because we're excavating a public building that Mary might have gone into many times because it's the municipal center of the whole region where you have to handle legal documents, taxes, and so forth. And certainly Joseph would have gone there, and later Jesus, who becomes head of the family.
Mm-hmm. So if I remember, one of your points in the book is that Luke, or author of Luke Acts, would have had access to the genealogical records of Mary somehow, perhaps through one of Jesus's brothers or other sorts of family member connections.
Just some way, just the family as a whole. The Despasunai, the family of Jesus, they go on into the 2nd and 3rd century. We have lots of records of them. Did you know we even have a story of at the time of Hadrian and the sons or grandsons, we're not sure, of Jude, the apostle Jude, the brother of Jesus, are captured by the Romans and tortured because they want to be sure they don't have any of this apocalyptic messianic craziness in their head. And they go, we are farmers. No, we don't do that. Look at our hands. They're callous. They basically let them go and said they're stupid fools. They're not a danger. Just to have a story like that. These are the grandkids, or either the kids or the grandkids. Richard Balcom, that's what his book begins with and talks about. So yes, and I think these records are treasured and known. And guess where the chief place is that they kept the records for in the Galilee? This is Josephus says this. Sepphoris. The genealogical records are kept in Sepphoris. So here we get another Sepphoris connection. And so when the city's burning and the Jewish establishment is leaving and packing things up or whatever, trying to get out of danger, maybe basically surrendering to the Romans, they're punished because Judas, son of Hezekiah, broke into the armory and took over Sepphoris and made it a militant place that needed to be punished. And so the Romans punished by destruction. So the memories of Mary and the memories of the family, I try to recreate for you. And then I use archaeology at every point that I can to go to the place, to stand in the place, to touch the stones. And as I said, my students often say, I feel like taking off my shoes and walking barefoot on these mosaics. I said, go for it. And some of them do. They want to feel like I walked. Because this is the first century floor that we excavated for sure, of a large municipal building. I think maybe even the palace, although Jim Strange, who was the archaeologist I work with, he thought it was a municipal building for running city business, which it well might have been. But that could even be part of the palace complex. So the book's exciting. You'll delve into it. You'll learn so much. I hope it's a page turner, and I'll let you come up with maybe some other specific questions that you might want to probe from reading the book. But that's the overview of how I work.
And I'd highly recommend it. And like, we only scratched the surface on some of the information in this book. So don't feel like this interview is getting you out of having to do your homework of actually reading the book. But one question that I feel like I want to drill down a little bit more with you is, what are we to make of the virgin birth account? So if Luke, Acts's author, has direct connections to some of the family members of Jesus, even to the point of having access to Mary's genealogical records, and that, you know, that is a reliable and insightful look into Mary's history, why then wouldn't he also have access and information into the story about those virgin birth accounts?
Well, as to where they came from, we don't know. And Matthew also has his own version of it. Matthew's is told from Joseph's point of view. And as it stands, not as it's normally interpreted, but as it stands, it's a story about a betrothed husband with his wife Miriam, betrothed, not yet consummated, finding out that in fact his wife's pregnant. It's not him, but he has a dream that child is of the Holy Spirit. That which is begotten of her is of the Holy Spirit. That could be taken as the idea of accept the child as your own, which he does. And then he marries her. And then it says he did not know her, sleep with her, until she had brought forth her firstborn son. Presumably then you would have a regular marriage with these 7, 8, 9 kids, however many there were, we don't know. Now that's controversial to most pious Catholic believers in the perpetual virginity of Mary. Many Protestants don't necessarily go with that, and they go, no, the brothers are brothers. What's the problem?
We might even use that as an apologetic angle against Catholicism to lean into those facts. Yeah.
But Luke is different, because Luke tells a story where Mary is not yet pregnant and is told she will be pregnant. And she raises the question, how can this be if I've never known a man? And then is told almost the same words, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and that which is begotten of you will be of the Holy Spirit. Now, we say virgin birth, it's really virginal conception, meaning conception without a human male. I simply, I don't know what Luke's worldview is. I would assume that, as I cover in the book in that chapter, Mary's Secret, that he's presenting Jesus as a divine man that had an extraordinary birth that we find so common in Greco-Roman literature for almost all the great heroes and emperors and philosophers and so forth, from Plato on down to Alexander the Great. And even current emperors are said to, even though we know their mother, they're said to be begotten by a god or with the help of a god and so forth. So in that chapter, I consider all three. What I say is that there's either no human father, that would be the position of most evangelical Christians who accept these accounts just as they're written, particularly Luke, or Joseph is the father. I think most of my academic colleagues would just go with probably Joseph. Virgin birth is a later thing that's added to make him more holy, or another man. And if there's another man, we'd have to ask, well, has anybody ever mentioned, and I also talk about that, a person named Pantera, who I present as part of the family, not a Roman soldier that rapes Mary or anything like that. But as far as Luke getting it right, look, Luke might have access to genealogical records, but when you get the entire chapters of 1 and 2 with Mary's, what's called the Magnificat, her, what she says and what each of the prophets say in the temple and every detail of that, I have no idea if he's going around interviewing eyewitnesses for that. What I'm trying to say about eyewitnesses is that Mary growing up would remember many, many things that you might not associate her with in terms of that dense history that I cover, because it would be talked about just as the Irish Rebellion of 1798. What Crossan said in my interview was something like, in his Irish accent, which I can't do, it makes it more effective and therefore true. He would have said something like, I remember the day when Cephras was burnt to the ground. I want to tell you about that, children. So it would be as real to them as World War II was to me, you see. Because my dad's telling me how he felt on the day the bomb was dropped in Japan and so forth, the 2 bombs and all that, how it felt. And yet I wasn't even born. But as far as the accuracy of Luke Acts in terms of everything, I'm not claiming that's all eyewitness. I think he freely edits and readapts and adapts things, as you can see by comparing it with Mark. He's not trying to be a stenographer. If Mark is his source, he takes out a lot of Mark. He takes out all the failure of the disciples, sometimes even reverses it. So just depends.
And so what do you think about the title Son of God as respecting Jesus and that connection to the virgin birth? Because the virgin birth, as we've mentioned, is only in Matthew or Luke, and you're even suggesting that Matthew can even be thought about to not be as suggestive as maybe necessarily many people take it to be. But Son of God is in all the Gospels and the Pauline epistles and all over the place. Was the virgin birth story a way to try and understand why that title might actually be more than just kind of a messianic thing? How do you think about that?
Well, the Messiah is the Son of God. Every king is the Son of God. There's already that kind of language used. You are my son, this day I've begotten you, David's told. And the Jewish followers of Jesus, later called Nazarenes or Ebionites, they actually said that took place at the baptism, not the birth, that the birth was the human side of things, because they said Joseph was the father. So you do have within the church, of course, they're labeled as heretics, but these are documents as well and traditions that we have Hebrew gospel of the Ebionites, gospel of the Nazarenes, and so forth, where you have a different tradition coming from the Jewish stream of things. And Paul himself talks about born of a woman. And that actually is a phrase used in Hebrew that Jesus also uses about John the Baptist. It means an ordinary human being.
No.
Among those born of women, meaning not special birth or anything, but born of women. There's none greater than John. So Paul sees Jesus as born of a woman, not an angel appearing or an epiphany or anything like that, flesh and blood. So it just gets into just what you think about science, what you think about reality, what your view is. What I try to tell my students, they'll ask me things like, well, do you think Jesus turned water to wine? It says he did in John at the wedding of Cana. And I tell them that in a historical study of any document, you record what the document says, but as the historian compiling it, whatever I personally would say in terms of, I'll give you a verdict on that happened. That probably didn't happen. That's exaggerated. I have no way of doing that. All I can say is Jesus is reported to have walked on water. What's the earliest account? Mark. Okay, I've given you what I can say. If you go, but did he walk on water? I can't answer that. So I think what I try to do is work with the sources. Another big thing, if you don't mind me suggesting, because I want, we're probably going a little bit over time, but you said you'd go as long as we want here. I want to also say another shocking thing that to me should not be shocking at all, and I don't know why it's shocking, and that is that James is the beloved disciple in John, the mysterious beloved disciple. And I'm very strong on that, and I don't see how there's any other possibility. Now, when I presented this to groups, I've talked a lot in the last, 3 months, the book's been out, let's see, September, October, more than that, 4 months, 5 months, I guess, time flies. I've spoken to live audiences and questions. People always say, Dr. Tabor, I thought John, the fisherman, the brother of James, he's the beloved disciple. Gospel of John must be the author talking about himself. And what I asked them is, who first suggested that, do you think? How early would that tradition be? And it turns out it's Irenaeus in 180 or later, the church father, 180. And yet it just took over the world. And everybody says, John's the beloved disciple. But if you think about Jewish culture, Jesus is the firstborn. He dies. At his death, he passes on the care of his widowed mother, because Joseph is gone. She's a widow. Early on, Jesus takes his mother and brothers to Capernaum. What do you mean, Jesus? What about Dad? Did Dad stay home? Dad is gone after age 12, and I don't even know if that story is historical, because we get other stories of Josephus and wise men at 12 knowing more than any of the wise men of their culture and so forth. So I'm not sure of that. It just seems like a nice story to pass on. But in terms of James, I think he's unnamed by the author, but I think the author knows who it is. He also knows the high priest. Now, how would a fisherman from Galilee know the high priest? But if James and the family have priestly ties and have come to Jerusalem now for over 30 years, 3 times a year at festivals, and knowing the family, the priestly family of Zechariah and Elizabeth and so forth, and John the Baptizer, and maybe John the Baptizer had children. There's no reason to think that these people are celibate. Jews generally are not. Celibacy is not a Jewish thing at all, ever, that I know of. And I won't get into Qumran now, but I doubt some of those passages. And the Dead Sea Scrolls do not say that they're celibate. I think that community at Qumran might have been celibate, but I said I wasn't going to get off on that. But anyway, back to James. So he's the beloved disciple and provides some of that eyewitness material that you get in John that's very interesting. Great details about the trial. Talks about Annas as high priest and all kinds of things. Now, I don't know if that came from James, but it comes from a circle of tradition that the author of the Gospel of John has access to. And when you get to chapter 18, 19, 20, it is not based on Mark. Mark doesn't know hardly any of that material. And it's very, very accurate in terms of who's the high priest, who's the son-in-law of the high priest, what are their names, where's the trial take place, the praetorium outside of Herod's palace, not on the Via della Rosa at the Antonio Fortress. It has all of this material that is coming from earlier witnesses, if not the circle of James. So I think he's the beloved disciple. And I think he takes Mary into his home. Then I bring in the archaeology, as you know, because there's a house on Mount Zion that goes back to the 1st century that is known as Mary's house, and also the house of John, because the church later thinks that John is the beloved disciple, and they call it the house of John. And I'm calling it the house of James. So James has moved. I'm talking about the brother of Jesus. Maybe in his 20s. This is suggested by Dom Crossan, I think, in his book on Jesus, what is it called? The Mediterranean Peasant, maybe, or can't remember if that's his subtitle.
I can't remember.
Yeah, but anyway, his main book on Jesus. He suggests that James, as sharing the priestly lineage, which the Ebionites talk about him wearing the priestly mitre and going into the sanctuary, and only a priest could do that, into that area that's the most holy. I don't necessarily mean he went into the tent of meeting and inside, but it does say he went into the sanctuary and prayed there. This is Hegesippus, early 2nd century Jewish Christian. So he's one of our best sources for James. So I think James takes over the movement. So not only he's going to take over the movement, but his mother's going to go to this fisherman. Nothing against James, but the 2 stories we have of James, the fisherman, and he was beheaded. So we want to honor that. That's a horrible thing to think about, him dying like that. But in his lifetime, he and his brother John. We have 2 stories. One, they want to burn up a village because it didn't accept them. And the other is they ask, could we have the 2 main places bumping out Peter, because they're afraid Peter is going to get the first place, right and left hand, remember? And their mother's right behind them. Mrs. Zebedee, she's like, come on, I want my boys to have the main seats. After all,
first century Jewish tiger mom.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I really do think it's James. And I don't know why people are so shocked. How does this get embedded in our bloodstream and DNA where we go, there's one thing he says that I just can't accept. And yet it's a late tradition. And you just have to ask, who would Jesus turn his mother's care over to?
He does say, mother, behold your son.
Absolutely. Son, behold your, that's symbolic. Come on. And I think we're going to find evidence of that hinted at in the church fathers, because they say openly that Peter and all the apostles did not look to their own ego and their own selves, but turned over, they actually use the word throne, thronos. They turned over the thronos, or the chair, just means a chair, a seat, to James, the brother of Jesus, they call him. Now later, when she can't have children, that can't be his brother. It has to be either his cousin or his stepbrother. Eastern stepbrother. Latin, Joseph can't have sex either. He's too holy. Mary's too holy. So those brothers are brothers of his brother, Clophas. So now we're going to make them stepkids that just kind of hung around a lot. Again, I don't think Jesus turns his mother over to a cousin or a stepbrother. I think it's James, the brother of Jesus. And that's what Paul calls him. Of course, brother can mean other things. It does today.
Mm-hmm.
We use it almost daily to mean other things with our friends and others. You're like a brother to me, or we talk about bro. It's become part of our lingo now. Hey, bro, brother. But these scenes,
the way that it's brought up,
scenes.
Yeah, I agree. One question I have, I don't think you dealt with it too much, is the flight to Egypt.
Yes.
What do you think of the flight to Egypt? I always find it sort of romantical to think about Mary and Joseph and Jesus fleeing to Egypt. And I think most people imagine them like hanging around pyramids and camels or stuff like that. But if that were to take place, the obvious place that they would go is Alexandria, which would have a large, refugees go to big cities that have refugee communities of their ethnic group in them.
Sure. Yeah.
But what do you think of that story?
It's so tied to what seems to be the legend of killing all of the male children in Herod's whole territory from 2 years old down, which seems to be just, I think it has some historical memory to it in terms of Sepphoris and messianic upstarts and killing messianic offspring. But to say that that literally happened, then they went to Egypt and waited 2 years and came back. To me, that's all Matthew's dream stuff. It's covered very quickly in Matthew 1 and 2. And I don't know what to do with it historically. Seems pretty unlikely to me. Luke just has them going back to Sepphoris. I mean, how would he not know that? He seems to, if he does know Matthew, he's read all that and thought, whoa, wait a minute. It says they went back to Nazareth. I believe I might have misspoken earlier. Mary's in Nazareth when she has the vision. So she's already joined her engaged husband in Nazareth. They haven't consummated the marriage yet. So
is that common or possible or questionable? I imagine, like, even in our own culture, even with cohabitation levels, what they are, moving in with your fiance is not, the highest levels of respectable. I can only imagine what that might have seemed like back then.
Yeah, they're not. I agree. They're not living together in the same house or the same room or sleeping together. I don't think they're doing that. But remember, these are extended families. Mm-hmm. Joseph's and Mary's family could well be related. This unknown Jewish kid, Pantera, that the rabbis say is the father of Jesus, one source says he's a person of Joseph's clan. The other says Mary's clan. And these clans, remember, these Davidic clans know each other. In Nazareth is called Branchtown, the town of the branch. And so it could well be that she has other relatives there and other family members, and Joachim and Anna, being prosperous, live just to the north 4 miles. Think of it as one area, not two. Mm-hmm. So she's in Nazareth, meaning, not literally in his bedroom, but she's known as Mary of Nazareth. So we just don't know those kind of details. I don't think you could come up with any kind of speculation, but I could speculate a different way and come up with something different. So, but sure. I don't take that slaughter of the innocent story other than something that Matthew creates. And then his justification for it is really interesting. Out of Egypt, I've called my son, which is really referring to Israel in the book of Hosea. So if anything, it's a very light motif, not something that Luke wants to invest in at all.
Sure. Well, any closing thoughts before we bring this interview to a wrap?
Well, there is, let's see. One other thing I just want to add is how Mary got almost divinized and made into a goddess, and how she was lost. The book's called A Lost Mary, So I want to emphasize at the end here what she lost. And in the last few chapters, I talk about what we could recover of why she lost it, what went on theologically. And it's basically an aversion to this world, to sexuality, what it is to be human, and a exaltation of the celibate ascetic life as being more divine, more pleasing to God, more holy. And it's something that infiltrates the ancient world. And unfortunately, it got into the very Hebrew narratives that we find in the New Testament that are more of Hebrew culture. But in terms of what she lost all of her children but Jesus. I'm talking about church history. Wow. That I would start with number one. She lost her religion. Who thinks of Mary as Jewish? Say, oh yeah, she was Jewish, but no, she's Jewish. At the end, I say that statue of her in the old city that I pass every day on the way to the Mount Zion dig, glassed in, I want to open the case and bring her out and say, look, Mary, this is Jerusalem, the city you remember. I think she would head straight for the Jewish quarter, smell that Sabbath bread baking, look at where the temple was and weep. And she would remember, if she remembered anything, Mount Zion. And that would be not Christian Mount Zion, which develops later, but Mount Zion in the first century before the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. So her religion, her family, her womanhood, her sexuality, her husband, for all practical purposes, if you go with the celibate view, if a marriage isn't consummated, that's not your husband. That's not your wife. According to the Bible, you leave your father and mother, you become one with the one you marry, and the two become one flesh. That's the definition of marriage, all the way back to the book of Genesis. So she's not even married. And so on and on and on. And I think she's been robbed of her message. I have a whole chapter on Mary's message. And when you read it, you're going to say, well, that's Jesus's message. Why you said it's Mary's message? Well, sorry for that, but I think some of the women understand who've had the children and raised them and taught them everything they know, and they turn out wonderful. And somebody says, boy, you did a good job with your son there, Sam, or your daughter. And what about your wife? Yeah, she helped a little bit. Now, do I know that? No. But come on. This is very Catholic in the sense that the Catholics think of Mary as the most spiritual and holy woman. And I think that would be a good thing to add. So let's close with that last slide, and that'll make the point.
Sure.
Let's put Mary up on the day of Pentecost. Now, I did this, Google. You try it. Go to Google under images and do Mary, the Mother on Pentecost. And all of a sudden, I get all of this ancient art, later art, modern art, all the way back to the Byzantine period. And look who's at the center in every picture. Now, she's virginal, no kids but Jesus, of course. Jesus is in heaven. But put her back at the center. And she was there. She lived in Jerusalem until her death. She might have lived long enough, and I hope not almost, to see James stoned to death and buried as well. If you do the chronology, people can live into their 70s and 80s.
Sure.
So you just have to figure it out. And she well might have. The tradition is she died early because you kind of want to get her off the scene. Because I think in some of our records, like, okay, she was the vessel, and now let's talk about Jesus, the main thing. So I think it's really important. Put her back at the center, and let's just use the old phrase, the hand that rocks the cradle. You know, Mary taught Jesus everything he knew from the time he could walk growing up, and women took charge of the education of the children. And when the boys became old enough, they could begin studying with rabbis and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that's well said. And I don't often think of Mary as being at Pentecost, but you're right. Well, anyway, we should bring this to a close. Dr. Tabor, I thank you very much for your time. I also thank you for your time writing this book. And we should talk again sometime. The list of things that we have to talk about is plenty long.
Good.
And I would certainly enjoy it. I enjoy your scholarship. I enjoy your work. I enjoy your passion for these subjects. I enjoy your writing. I listen to the audiobook. You know, you've got a good audiobook voice. I just want to bring that up too.
I read it myself. Can you believe that? That was
Yeah.
so hard to do.
So thank you very much. And audience, please check out The Lost Mary. You can find it wherever you like to buy your books, or if you like to listen to your books, like I said. I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah, and I recommend, the audio is great. I think I read it, and it's unabridged. Every word is there, but not.
Although the footnotes, like you surprised me.
The notes aren't there though.
Yeah,
the notes aren't there, and they're so important. A third of the book is notes, but also you need the feel of Mary in your home.
Yeah,
an audio thing somewhere on a computer. Put Mary in your home, then she won't be lost anymore. Then your family can pick it up and read it, and you can take it to church or wherever, Bible study, and spread the word. Think of the women in history that have been forgotten. Just about every one of them. You know, we can name all these great men. What about their mothers? Do you know much about their mothers? So I hope you know a lot about Abigail Adams and Sam Adams and the mothers, because those mothers we do know about, and they were so important.
Yeah.
Maybe even to the success of the revolution in some cases. So,
yes, very true.
So how about this revolution?
I agree.
I say she's not the mother of God, she's the godmother.
The godmother, yeah, the godmother of
the movement,
of
and
Christianity.
she inspires it all. And they look to her in that honorable way as the mother of their Lord.
And that she would have been a focal point and a central organizing figure of the movement in those couple decades. Yeah.
I'd like to go back in time. If I could go back to one time, I think I would go to Nazareth, maybe around when Jesus is in his 20s, and just get to visit the household for one day. I want to hear conversations, or a Sabbath would even be better, because they'd be talking all day, going to synagogue. I want to hear everybody. I want to hear James. What was he like? I want to hear their personalities, and I want to hear her. And how much did she speak, and how does Joseph behave with her? That's my time machine moment. I want to, and if I could do that, I think I would get a good handle on whether I'm even close to right, and I think I am.
That's fast. That helps me understand you and your motivations and interests better. I'm glad that you shared that. In many ways, this book is the closest thing that you can attempt to do to that time machine. Yeah. All right. Well, I recommend the time machine. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and Dr. Tabor, I'm sure we'll speak again. Thank you very much.
Okay, Sam. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.